She talks about the person who starts drinking, the very first drink, it's like, oh my God, I want more because I feel happy. For the first time in my life, I feel happy. Ooh. And then, of course, you keep drinking to be happy, and it can take off, and you're off and running. And when these people stop drinking, the depression comes crashing back in. And sometimes people are faced with, do I kill myself or do I get drunk? And when that's the question facing you, getting drunk is the sane answer, right? And then she gave the solution. She explained why, and unless you want me to, I'm not going to go into all the biochemistry, but she explained why, and that it affects people from Scandinavian or Gaelic backgrounds like Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Well, my father was from Denmark. And it was like, oh my goodness, that's me. That's me. And so I stopped drinking, and I switched over to evening primrose oil that contains a fatty acid called GLA, gamma linoleic acid. And it did an even better job making the depression go away than the alcohol did. And I switched to borage oil, which contains the same molecule. It's just a little cheaper, easier to get. And I take one pill, and will take one pill every day for the rest of my life, because when I don't, that deep, dark, horrible depression just comes crashing back in. So it turned out that I had 9 different, maybe 10 different biochemical underpinnings to my depression and my anxiety and my ADHD and my fatigue. When I was 19, actually, I first discovered I was depressed from day one. I was depressed from day one. Now, I also had trauma and this, that, and, your dysfunctional alcoholic family and the whole bit. And so by the time I entered adulthood, I was a full-blown mess. I'm sure some of your listeners can identify with being full-blown messes. And I was a full-blown mess. Now, I had never gotten into substances because I was trying so hard to keep control of my life that I didn't dare try anything that would, bring chaos into my life, because there was enough chaos in it already. And so I was your good girl, and I stayed away from everything until my mid-20s, when I discovered that 3/4 of a beer when I got home from work temporarily made the depression lighten, made me almost happy, made me almost feel like I was flying. And I wanted more. Now, the problem is, now I'm grateful right now for the problem, but a whole glass of wine, a whole beer, a whole cocktail, a whole whatever, put me to sleep. It's like, good night. So I was limited to 3/4. Now, thank God I was limited to 3/4, because I had alcoholism throughout, both sides of my family, and I was a sitting duck, except that it put me to sleep. But 3/4 of it, ooh, I organized my whole life around making sure that it was waiting for me when I got home every day. Now, somewhere along the way here, I made my way through school, and I became a addiction counselor. And in those days, to be an addiction counselor meant being an alcoholism counselor. So I was working with, all of these people with alcohol use disorder in a variety of settings. And I was very clear that this 3/4 of a beer was, probably a problem. But I kept telling myself, no, 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 it's not a problem, because I don't get drunk. It's only 3/4. And on the one hand, that's true, right? I never crossed that little invisible line where I lost choice. But I had an addictive relationship with my 3/4 of a beer, because it made the depression almost go away. And then in 1993, one of the first books on nutrition and addiction came out called, at that point, it was Alcoholism, the Biochemical Connection. Now it's 7 Weeks to Sobriety by Joan Matthew Larson. And she was one of the first books to really look at the biochemical underpinnings of alcohol use disorder, and that it really wasn't a moral thing. It really didn't have anything to do with willpower. It didn't have anything to do with emotional things. And we know it does, right? We know that those are aspects of it. But she spent the whole book looking at the underlying biochemical dynamics. And one of the things she did in there that nobody's done before, and I don't think has done since, is identified 3 biochemical types of alcohol use disorder. You know, we all know that we have a different relationship with alcohol and it affects us differently. And even though a lot of people end up, as equally addicted to it with destroyed lives as the next person, a lot of people get to that point differently and for different reasons. So Joan Matthew Larson talks about her 3 biotypes, and I'm reading along, and I come face to face with myself. She talks about the person who starts drinking. The very first drink, it's like, oh my God, I want more because I feel happy. For the first time in my life, I feel happy. Ooh. And then, of course, you keep drinking to be happy, and it can take off, and you're off and running. And when these people stop drinking, the depression comes crashing back in. And sometimes people are faced with, do I kill myself or do I get drunk? And when that's the question facing you, getting drunk is the sane answer, right? And then she gave the solution. She explained why, and unless you want me to, I'm not going to go into all the biochemistry, but she explained why, and that it affects people from Scandinavian or Gaelic backgrounds like Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Well, my father was from Denmark. And it was like, oh my goodness, that's me. That's me. And so I stopped drinking, and I switched over to evening primrose oil that contains a fatty acid called GLA, gamma linoleic acid. And it did an even better job making the depression go away than the alcohol did. And I switched to borage oil, which contains the same molecule. It's just a little cheaper, easier to get. And I take 1 pill, and will take 1 pill every day for the rest of my life, because when I don't, that deep, dark, horrible depression just comes crashing back in. So it turned out that I had 9 different, maybe 10 different biochemical underpinnings to my depression and my anxiety and my ADHD and my fatigue. When I was 19, actually, I first discovered that I was allergic to eggs, and eggs made me depressed. And so I had always been interested in this. And I'd been an addiction counselor and a licensed psychotherapist for a couple of years. Working at that point, I had stopped working with people with direct addiction, and I was specializing at that point in time with family members. When I saw this press release in the newspaper about this nutritionally oriented outpatient treatment program that had just opened across the Bay Area from where I was living. I was living in Oakland, and this program opened in Mill Valley. And I was really intrigued because I knew that nutrition mattered. I'd begun to see in my clients that what they ate and what they didn't eat, and in myself, made a tremendous difference. So I went and interviewed Julia Ross and her nutritionist, Crispin Sullivan. And Crispin shook my hand and said, "You're hypothyroid. You're low thyroid." And I looked at her and I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Well, because your hands are cold and dry." And I was so impressed by this that I made an appointment with her to figure out what was wrong with me. because I had been ill my whole entire life. And she did. She discovered that I was gluten intolerant and then sent me to a integrative physician, even way back when, in the very early 90s, who really started getting me well as I could get, and introduced me to amino acids. So that was when, in the early 1990s, I first started learning about amino acid therapy. I took Julia's classes. I met with Julia's rep, Don Tyson. Every Friday we had lunch together, and he taught me amino acid therapy. And then I went and got the same training as the nutritionist did, because she was brilliant. I wanted to know what she knew. And I started going to all of the, what now would be called functional medicine, but the term hadn't been coined then, all of the seminars by Jeffrey Bland. Jeffrey Bland ended up creating the Institute for Functional Medicine. And at first, it all went over my head. And then 75%, and then 50%. And then I started really understanding it, and now I teach it. So it's been a long journey of putting all these pieces together, but I was committed to sort of being the next generation of people applying nutrition to mental health and addiction recovery. And I'm so grateful to the people who, just sort of one generation ahead of me, Joan Matthew Larson and Charlie Gant and Julia Ross, and some of the earlier people like Patricia Slagle, who wrote the book, The Way Up from Down. But you know what a lot of people don't know, Matt? And that is that Bill W. himself was using nutritional therapies back in the 1950s and 60s. And he did a whole lot of research with his buddies in AA. He did a study with 600 people in AA using vitamin B3, niacin, to decrease depression, decrease cravings, and in fact, decrease the kind of schizophrenic, psychotic symptoms that a lot of them were struggling with. In fact, he told his wife before he died, he told Lois that he would rather be remembered for his work with nutrition and recovery than his work with AA itself. Let's talk about post-acute withdrawal for a minute. Everybody knows about post-acute withdrawal, PAW, and we're all told that it's inevitable and that you just have to white knuckle through it and go to more meetings and pray more and maybe take medication, and sooner or later you'll feel better, right? But all your depression and your anxiety and your insomnia and your cravings and your relapses and your relapses and your relapses after getting clean and sober, we can't do anything about because it's post-acute withdrawal. Well, the reality is that there are exactly two biochemical drivers of post-acute withdrawal. One is depleted neurotransmitters, right? Tolerance, which gets us all, is due to gradually depleting brain chemicals, right? Your dopamine and your serotonin and your norepinephrine and your endorphins, the reservoirs in the brain get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we need to take more and more drug or more and more behavior to get the same effect. So you stop using, you go into withdrawal because your brain just doesn't know how to cope with anything without the drug. And then it kind of gets the hang of it, but you still feel miserable because your neurotransmitters are still depleted. Well, we can fix that within 20 minutes by using the right amino acid. The targeted amino acid therapy, whether it be tyrosine to raise dopamine or 5-HTP for serotonin, your dephenylalanine, right, that kind of helps with your endorphins, all of these can turn off that aspect of post-acute withdrawal within 20 minutes. Within 20 minutes. And they're anti-addictive, which is just kind of a game changer and quite mind-boggling. But there's another driver of post-acute withdrawal, and this is reactive hypoglycemia. And yes, there are some treatment programs that actually do blood glucose tests on people when they first come into treatment. And 95% of people with all addictive disorders, whether it be alcohol or cocaine or opioids or THC or sugar, at least in the beginning of treatment, are medically diagnosable with reactive hypoglycemia. So what is that? It means two things. If you skip a couple meals, it means that your blood sugar plummets to very, very low. Or if you eat sugar and refined carbs, and who doesn't switch to sugar, your blood sugar goes up and then it plummets. Well, there's a real serious problem with blood sugar plummeting to really low. The body does not like this at all. And it says, oops, we're going to die, do something. And the adrenals shoot out adrenaline, and they shoot out a lot of adrenaline. Well, adrenaline raises blood sugar levels back up to normal, but adrenaline does a couple of other really, really nasty things. It destabilizes us, and that destabilization leads to a non-choice response craving. Right? We all know this, right? Whether we're excited or whether we're frightened or whether whatever. In early recovery, if we're emotionally destabilized, what does our brain say? Where's your drug? Where's your best friend? Go find it. Go use. Okay? So adrenaline from low blood sugar does that, sets off that craving. But it also turns off the part of our brain where our recovery skills are stored, the prefrontal cortex, executive functioning. And people who have ADD in recovery struggle with this anyway. But adrenaline turns this off. So you've got a craving. Willpower's gone out the window because willpower also goes out the window. The desire to say no, the reasons why you want to say no go out the window. And all your recovery skills go out the window. So a lot of people will relapse just by that alone, or you get another stressor coming in. You've got no recovery skills, you're already destabilized, and off we go. So two things, amino acid therapy, and yes, I actually like doing a combination of a total like free form amino acid formula that has it all in it to kind of build your foundation and help your endorphins. And then I believe in adding to that targeted amino acids to rebuild whatever neurotransmitter system is most depleted in your brain. So we use the amino acids for the depleted neurotransmitters over a period of, say, 8 to 10 months. Some people need more. I needed 10 years. Other people only, need a year or so. And then keeping blood sugar absolutely stable by eating protein. I recommend 20 grams of protein consistently every 4 waking hours, because what that does is keeps blood sugar stable. So you're not doing these highs and lows. We're not getting adrenaline. We're not getting those cravings. We retain access to our recovery skills, and all the protein we're eating turns into amino acids, that's also rebuilding our neurotransmitter systems. Those two things together are game changers and make post-acute withdrawal just sort of like go away. It's not a one-legged stool. It's not just biochemistry. But when you take care of your brain, when you get your brain repairing and rebalancing itself, so you're not getting the physiological cravings, then you can actually do the work of what I call the other two legs of the stool, right? The psychosocial healing, the healing of shame, the healing of trauma, the breaking your isolation, the learning how to actually, be in real community, and the spiritual work, the finding meaning and purpose in life, the learning to trust yourself and other people, the learning to forgive yourself and forgive other people. Right, I consider those things the spiritual legs of the stool. Well, we have to have a functioning brain in order to do those other two legs of the stool. Traditional treatment does a great job, when it does a great job, of addressing the psychosocial and spiritual aspects of addiction, right? But they ignore the brain other than medication. This is like sitting on a 3-legged stool that only has 2 legs. How long are you going to stay upright, right, when you're trying to teetering and trying to balance on 2 legs, but you can't ever find your balance because that 3rd leg's missing? You bring that 3rd leg in, and all of a sudden, now you're solid. Now you're seated. Now it's really hard to push you over. We can see this because we can turn off a craving within 20 minutes without medication using either the right amino acid or food. And one of the stories that really got me into this and really made me decide to start my other nonprofit a couple of years ago called Eating Protein Saves Lives, because it does, is this lovely Irish woman, maybe 20 odd years ago. I was at a amino acid IV clinic. I was the relapse prevention counselor there. This woman came in dragging her IV pole, sat down and started to cry. And she said, I'm one of these people that the big book says is constitutionally incapable of sobriety because, this is her third treatment program. And she tells me this whole story. But what it boils down to is she kept relapsing because she wouldn't eat anything all day. She'd eat breakfast and then she just wouldn't eat all day. And by the time dinner came, she'd already picked up. And I explained to her the biochemistry of this. And now she's crying because she has hope. Because she says, you mean it's not hopeless? You mean if I just started eating protein throughout the day and balance my blood sugar, I'm going to stop relapsing? And I said, I think so. I don't know for certain, but this is your third treatment program. You're going to 3 AA meetings a day. You have all the skills. You know what to do. You have the support and community. This is the missing piece. And it was. And she invited me to an AA meeting like 5 years later for her 5-year chip. And she was still sober. Right? So this applies to not just picking up your drug or a behavior of choice. This also has to do with domestic violence, with child abuse, with panic attacks, with all sorts of mental health issues. These two things go way beyond just substance use disorders and impact every area of our functioning. We can use glutamine to buy us time to get food when blood sugar plummets and we start getting really dysregulated and start getting a craving. It starts dancing through your head. You haven't grabbed a hold of it yet, but the thought's dancing. That's when you need to either get food or get glutamine. But I discovered something else about glutamine. And so I had a practice in Denver for 20 years with the chronic relapser. Well, I had all my colleagues, I said, send me your failures. Send me your treatment failures. Send me the people you don't know what to do with. And so they would. And so my whole caseload was, these wonderful, lovely people who were so committed to, to recovery, to abstinence, to recovery, and yet could not figure out how to make it work. And yet they kept trying and kept trying and kept failing and felt so bad about themselves. And there were several different reasons. Everybody had, different stories, but what everybody had in common was the starving brain. The chronic relapser, in my experience, does not eat. You get them eating, and all of a sudden, everything changes. Well, I had this guy show up in my office one afternoon, rip-roaring drunk, reeking of alcohol, slurring, stumbling. I have no idea how he got safely to my office, and I did not let him drive home. He had, long story short, he had slammed shots over the lunch hour. He'd eaten breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning and then had just slammed straight shots. So I don't quite know how many over like a 3-hour period, but I'm going to guess it was about 8 to 10. So he stumbles and weaves himself into my office, way too incoherent to actually have a session. But he used to be a bodybuilder, and he brought in his bag of supplements, which I dumped on the floor, and there was a tub of glutamine powder. So I got his permission, took a teaspoon of the powder, which is about 4 or 5 grams, mixed it with a little bit of water, and had him drink it. Within 10 minutes, the weirdest thing I've ever seen, Matt, this man no longer acted drunk. Now, he was still reeking of alcohol, but he was clear, he was coherent, he was no longer stumbling or weaving, he was no longer slurring, he acted sober. just because the glutamine was getting his prefrontal cortex functioning. Well, he was so impressed by that he came back the following week, and we figured out that the reason he couldn't stay sober is because he was gluten intolerant. There's a small group of people with alcohol use disorder where it's driven by this gluten intolerance. And he was one of them. And as soon as we discovered this and he stopped eating gluten again, he stopped drinking. It can take a while for people to start eating real food real consistently and to be able to digest and absorb it. Because a lot of people in very early abstinence have a completely destroyed gut and destroyed digestion. So we need a good multivitamin, and that Centrum is not a good multivitamin, by the way. We want a good 25 milligrams at least of B6 in it and a number of other things. So we start with that for all the cofactors, because you see, the amino acids don't turn into neurotransmitters by themselves. They need to be in the presence of vitamins and minerals. So your multivitamin. Then maybe you need some digestive enzymes to just help that digestive process along for a little bit. And then you need fish oil. And if you can't tolerate fish oil, go for flaxseed oil. But we need the omega-3 fatty acids for the cell membrane, because the neurotransmitters aren't enough. They have to actually get fired. They have to cross the cell membrane and get into the synapse and then get picked up again for this signal to be sent downstream to make you feel good. Well, so we need to be eating the right fats. So at least 2 grams of good quality fish oil a day. And we know that so many people relapse because of brain injury, traumatic brain injury. One of the biggest drivers of chronic relapse, because people's brains aren't working well enough because of the injury. Well, Dr. Michael Lewis, who's speaking at my conference, which we'll talk about in a minute, he discovered that fish oil helps the brain heal from concussion. And so getting on a good quality fish oil. When I discovered fish oil, it was one of the things my brain was missing. After 3 days on it, it was like the sun came out. It was like, I was thinking in a straighter line. My mood was better. My energy was better. Everything was brighter. So fish oil takes about 3 days to kick in. And it's just, for me, everything was brighter. So throwing that into the mix. And then generally a good quality perfect amino is one, but there's other full spectrum amino acid formulas to get the foundation in place. And then your targeted aminos. And then you can add whatever you need on top of that. Okay, we may need some herbs for various things. We may need some fancy stuff, right? Because of what's going on with us genetically. Now we get into the biochemical individuality. But pretty much everybody needs a good multivitamin. Pretty much everybody needs fish oil. Some people then need the borage oil I was talking about. Some people need extra zinc and B6 because they might have a genetic disorder called pyroluria, which leads to lifetime social anxiety. So, then it gets a little tricky. So this is why you train coaches, I train coaches to help people discover what else you need to do to really, really thrive. One size does not fit all. Some people do better with animal protein. Some people do better with more plant-based protein. Some people need, more niacin. Some people need less niacin. Some people need, I need the GLA because I'm Scandinavian and my body doesn't make it out of vegetable oil. Your body may do a great job making GLA out of vegetable oil, and you don't need extra borage oil. I'm gluten intolerant, and these clients of mine who couldn't stop drinking when they were eating gluten, okay, other people do just fine on gluten and don't have a problem at all with staying clean and sober. That's biochemical individuality. And so we have to find what fits you. I offer 3 signature courses. One is a little stick your toe in. It's a 6-hour introductory course. And we go over all of this briefly. And you get lots of handouts, you get lots of resources. It's really a wonderful, tiny little 6-hour course, but it's a place to start, and especially for lay people or for peer coaches, right? Just to get the foundation. For people who want to be able to do mental health nutrition and amino acid therapy on a real professional level for themselves, their families, or clients, or start their own business, I have a 2-tier certification program. My level 1 training at the end of it is a 10-month program. We meet 2 hours every other week to give you plenty of time to learn the material. At the end of it, my goal is to make you an expert at amino acid therapy and using amino acids, nutrients, and diet for most addictive disorders and mental health issues. It works phenomenally 80% of the time. 80% of the time, it's amazing. 20% of the time, it either does nothing at all or doesn't do enough. So then I created my level 2 course based a little bit on John Matthew Larson's book, 7 Weeks to Sobriety. And we go step by step by step through all of the body disorders that can drive mental health and addictive issues, that can cause dis-ease, starting with digestion, looking at food intolerances. We do a deep dive into sugar addiction. We look at adrenals and the thyroid and female hormones. We look at testosterone. We look at inflammation and toxicity. And it's pretty high level. But at the end of it, you know how to recognize the symptoms of these issues and how these issues might be derailing somebody's recovery process. No matter how hard they're trying, no matter how dedicated they are, if somebody has a food intolerance, if somebody has a thyroid issue, if somebody has a testosterone issue, and I've got a wonderful story about that, it's going to derail somebody's recovery. And so I teach you how to recognize when these things are going on and to whom to refer. So my school website is aminoacidtherapy.com. Very easy to remember, very basic. Aminoacidtherapy.com. But I am so excited that we are putting on, and we being our whole community is doing this together. I'm spearheading it, but I'm not doing it alone. It takes a community. We're putting on the first summit on nutrition and addiction since 2010. It's going to be live in person in Columbus, Ohio on April 30th, May 1st, and half of May 2nd. We're going to have wonderful speakers talking about all different aspects of this, the third leg of the stool, and maybe a little bit about the other 2 legs too, because it is a 3-legged stool. And we invite everybody to come in person. We also it will also be available virtually. So if you can't come in person, you can catch it online, and it will be recorded. So that website is a little longer. It's feedtherecoveringbrain.com, which is what all of us need to be doing, is feedtherecoveringbrain.com.